Hey, hi, how are you? Welcome back to Final Fantasy XIV, and today we're talking about Sage. I've been kind of putting off this video for a bit. Healer videos are harder for me to make as someone who doesn't play healer as much, and with Sage being new, I wanted to make sure that I got the gist of how the job functions at its core level before I started making a video about it, because it's new, and I don't want to be the one spreading like, oh, this ability on Sage is so strong, when I'm just flat out wrong. So I tried to make sure that I understood the basics of this and took my time doing a little bit of research here and there, try and get a real handle on it. So this isn't going to be the same as my other videos. It's going to be more like my other healer videos where I talk through the gist of here's how all of its skills function and how you should be using them in a raid space, more so than how to use a rotation and use in DPS on the job. But we are going to start out with the DPS skills, so let's get started. So Sage actually has one of the more interesting DPS kits as far as healers go. By more interesting, I mean they don't have a dot, a DPS button, and an AoE. They have a little bit more to them. They're a little more along the lines of Scholar's DPS kit than White Mage's or Astro's. You do have your basic skill, Dosis. Your dot is applied by going into eukrasian doses, which to do that you have to hit eukrasia, and then you hit the Dosis button again, and it will apply your damage over time. You also have Phlegma, which is just a big damage spell on a 45-second cooldown. You have Toxicon, which will be completely DPS the same. DPS the same is not the best way of putting it, but it does the same damage as a Dosis, except it is instant cast. It has an AoE with a little bit of drop off, but you can only use Toxicon if you have gotten a Adder Sting proc. And the only way to get an Adder Sting proc is by having the shield of Eukrasian Diagnosis broken. So you cast Eukrasian Diagnosis, the person has this little shield here. Once that shield breaks, you would get a proc to make Toxicon castable. However, that doesn't mean spam Eukrasian Diagnosis shields to get Toxicon procs. It's more of a bonus, like a tank needed a little bit of extra health going into a tank buster. You apply the shield, you get a Toxicon proc afterwards, which will just let you move for free. You have Dyscrasia, which is just your AoE, hit everything around you. And then you have Pneuma. Pneuma is going to be brought up several times throughout this video because it's a very unique skill, and it has several use case scenarios. It is DPS neutral, same as Toxicon. Pneuma, Toxicon, and Doses all deal 330 potency. Toxicon does it in an AoE with 50% less for remaining enemies. Pneuma does it in a straight line with 40% less for remaining enemies. However, Pneuma is also a 20 Yalm radius heal of 600 potency, which is a lot. Like I said, this is just the basics. I'm just talking about what the DPS skills are here, so you know what they are, why they matter when I talk about them later, when we get into the more detailed stuff. Speaking of DPS skills, let's talk about Sage's version of the fairy. Now that might sound a little strange if you don't play Scholar, but Scholar's fairy is essentially something that you summon and by default will just heal whoever's lowest target, the lowest target in the vicinity of the fairy. If it's a tank, it'll heal the tank. If it's a DPS, it'll heal the DPS. If it's a healer, it'll heal the healer. Whoever has the lowest HP, the fairy will auto-heal it. Sage has its own version called Kardia. But Kardia has a bit of a drawback by comparison to the fairy, but it is a lot more manageable as a thing because it is a choosable fairy. You will apply Cardion to whoever you choose, and that will make it so that whenever you use any of your DPS skills, you will heal that person. Any of them. Dyscrasia, Phlegma, Pneuma, Toxicon, Doses. If you notice, when I was hovering over the descriptions, every single one of them says restores HP to targets under the effect of Cardion granted by you. So every single one of these, on top of doing everything else that they already do, will heal for 170 potency to whoever you have attached your Cardion to. Your Kardia is the skill name, Cardion is the effect that you put on the person. I'm just going to clarify that. It does make it so that You get to choose who your healing goes to, unlike Scholar's Fairy. However, it only ever goes to the one person you have chosen. So, more specific healing, meaning that you can always make sure it's going to whoever's main tanking the fight. However, if it's a fight with adds and the tanks get split up and you want to make sure that a certain tank isn't dying who isn't the main tank, you would have to swap the buff. Now, it's a very short cooldown. It is 5 seconds, so it is very, very quick to reapply. As you can see, by the time I managed to click off the buff, it was already back up to be reapplied. So it's not a huge deal to reapply it in the middle of a fight. However, just, be careful. Don't do anything too crazy with it. Just try and leave it on whatever person's main tanking, so that they will be getting heals as you do DPS. So let's talk about GCD heals, which might sound a little strange because there's so much to talk about, and these are the most basic, boring parts of healing for the job. However, it's very important that we talk about the GCD heals. If you don't know what GCD heal is, I'm sorry, we're jumping into a bit more of the high-end stuff, but that's kind of where I feel like you need to go with Sage, because it's a bit more of a complex job in some ways, especially around the optimization of it. So, your GCDs obviously are the ones that spin when you push a GCD, so I'm using Eukrasia as an example so you can see which of my skills are all GCDs. The GCD heals you have, you actually only have 2. A lot of other healers will have maybe even up to 4 or even 5 GCD heals. You really only have 2. Now, don't get me wrong, Numa is a GCD heal. However, Numa, once again, is a special case in that it is also a damage skill, so it's not technically being included here because it doesn't also get modified by another skill that I'll talk about after I explain what the heals are. So the heals themselves, Prognosis, just flat cure potency. Cast button, cure party, big ol' AoE. Normal stuff. Diagnosis, push button, cure single target, normal stuff. The way that it gets weird is you have a button called Eukrasia. Now, we talked about it a little bit during the DPS portion, where hitting Eukrasia will turn Diagnosis to the dot version of Eukrasian Diagnosis. You might have noticed that it also altered 2 other skills. It altered Prognosis and Diagnosis, and I talked about Diagnosis with Toxicon a little bit. So I'm going to get into what that means now. Whenever you use Eukrasia, it will alter these 3 skills, 2 of which being your GCD heals. Now, Eukrasian Prognosis is the AoE Party Heal button, but now it is an AoE Party Heal with a magic barrier of 320% of your cure potency. In other words, you cure for 100, and then you put up a barrier for 320. Which is a pretty decent barrier, honestly. And then Eukrasian Diagnosis is restore HP for 300, and then put up a barrier for 180% of that. I can't do the math off the top of my head. But it's a good shield. It's a pretty solid shield, but you don't want to use it that often, because Sage has so many other buttons, and we'll get into those later, but I just need to explain how these buttons work in the first place. Because at some points you might need to use them because the whole run is falling apart. The other thing is that Eukrasian Diagnosis works the same way that Scholar's shielding does, in that if you crit, it grants a secondary shield that goes over top of the first one. So they will technically have 2 stacking shields of the same potency on top of each other, amounting to essentially an enormous shield that will keep them safe. If either one of those shields break, you will get a Adder Sting proc, by the way. Either one of the 2 shields from that breaking gives Adder Sting, which is very nice. Alright, so we've gone through a lot of the craziness of the job at this point. DPS skills, kardia and how it functions, the GCD healing. Let's go into addersgall, kind of the meat and potatoes of the job. So, addersgall is a resource that will naturally generate over time, similar to white mage lilies. However, they are a bit faster. It is every 20 seconds, inside and outside of combat. You will get a single charge of addersgall to use on any number of skills. Any number of skills. So, let's talk about the skills that use addersgall. You have Drutrol. This is your first addersgall skill. It is a single target heal for 600 potency, and it costs 1 addersgall. I want to bring attention to something. Using an addersgall skill restores 7% of your maximum MP, and by that, it translates to 700 MP. Every addersgall skill that you press, 700 free MP, just immediately. Let's talk about the actual skills. Druchol, single target heal. You get Tarachol. I also don't know if I'm saying these correctly, so this could be Tarachale. I apologize if I butcher them. However, you can see the words on the screen, so you know what skill I'm talking about. Tarachale, is a 700 potency cure, so slightly better, as well as a 10% damage mitigation on whatever target you put it on. Very, very powerful skill. It does apply the heal and the damage mid at the same time, so don't push it when a person's full health. However, if you have nothing else to help with mitigation, it can work in a pinch. That's your other single target one. As for your AoE ones, you have Eukrasia, which is just a 400 potency cure. That's it. It's just a nice AoE heal. I also want to point out that none of these are on the GCD. I'm sure you saw it earlier when I was showing off Disgracia, but I'll re-mention it in case you skipped to this part of the video. You can see everything that's on the GCD that's rolling. Not a single addersgall skill is on the GCD. They are all things that you will push in between casts of your damage skill. They are essentially free healing with no DPS loss. That is one of the reasons Sage is so powerful right now. You don't have to stop doing damage to heal the party. So, Eukrasia, whatever. I'm bad at pronunciations. AoE heal. Once again, restoring MP. Now, the best skill that Sage has, in my opinion, is Karachale. It is an AoE version of Tarachale. So it's 10% mit for everyone in a 15 yalm range. And, get this, after you reach level, I believe it is 78, yes, here it is, you get a heal over time of 100 potency for those 15 seconds. So it's a 500 potency cure with 10% mitigation off the OGCD that restores 700 MP. It is far and away one of the best buttons Sage has in its arsenal. It is incredibly powerful. Speaking of free MP though, there is Rizomata. Rizomata is a button on a 90-second cooldown that simply gives you an extra stack of addersgall. It's very useful if in a pinch you need to go, oh no, I really need to heal people. Eukrasia, oh no, the tank's dying, oh I'm out of addersgall, Rizomata, Druchale. It can be very useful in a pinch, or it can just be really useful to make sure that you are sitting on 3, in case there was a point in the fight where you had to Eukrasia followed by Eukrasia, and then Tarachale afterwards because the tank needed a shield, or some mitigation, and you realized you just want to have an extra stack, just in case the next time they come back up, you need to Eukrasia back to back again. It's just a nice button to have. Every 90 seconds can give you a free stack of addersgall. You don't really need to be spamming it off cooldown, however, if you are spamming these buttons off cooldown, Rizomata will help you keep the amount of addersgall you have in line. Man, I've been talking about this job so long that the time of day is changing. Holy. Alright, so there are some other heals that you have that are not tied to addersgall that are not on the GCD. There is 5 of them technically, but they all function very differently. So let's talk about them. Let's talk about the most powerful one, IMO, Physis, or Physis 2, after you go to level 60, which is a very powerful upgrade, mind you. Physis 2 is a 130 potency cure over time that also increases healing recovered by actions by 10% for 10 seconds. So, you push that button for the next 10 seconds, any other heal you push is just stronger. And this doesn't require addersgall at all. It is just a button that you press. So, if you push Physis 2, and then Eukrasia right before a big hit, you will have really powerful regen from 2 different things. You will have 10% mit, and then if you need to afterwards, you hit Eukrasia while you still have the buff from Physis 2 on to get an even better heal for the party. Physis 2 is a very powerful skill. It has no cost whatsoever. and it is simply a button on a 60-second cooldown. It is very, very, very strong. Now, let's talk about Pepsis. Pepsis is a really interesting ability that I am a big fan of, simply because of how it functions at its core. It is a button that they gave Sage that essentially makes it so that if you used shielding to heal the party, you are given a bonus chunk of healing. But let me explain that properly so that you don't get misconceptions like I did. If a party member has a shield on them, and then you press Pepsis. Let's make sure I'm even more specific properly, because Sage has more shielding that we're going to get into in a second. Pepsis applies to shields made by Eukrasian Diagnosis and Eukrasian Prognosis only, so your GCD heals. So if a big hit just went out and you were like, I really need to heal the party, I don't think Prognosis alone is going to cut it, but you're low on addersgall or eukrasia is on cooldown, this is where Pepsis comes into play. Because you can Eukrasian Prognosis, now the whole party will have a shield and have gotten healed. This is when you would push Pepsis. The way that Pepsis works is that if you have a shield on you, and the effect from Pepsis hits you, the shield is destroyed, gotten rid of, but you get a cure that is stronger than the shield would have been, based on the shield being left. It doesn't matter how much shield is left. If you have even a sliver of shield left, you will still get the heal. If you have a shield from Eukrasian Diagnosis, it's 450 potency. If it's from Eukrasian Prognosis, it's 350 potency. It is very, very strong. However, you need to have cast a shield using one of your GCD heals. And as you've noticed, Sage doesn't need to do that a lot. You have a lot of buttons you can push that will heal the party without having to use a GCD. However, if you're running out of stuff, you've even used up your Rizomata, and you're in a panic moment, you can Eukrasian Prognosis the party, and then hit Pepsis afterwards for a nice chunky AoE heal. That will be much stronger than Prognosis on its own. Prognosis is only 300 potency. Breaking the shield of Eukrasian Prognosis is 350 with Pepsis. So it is a stronger heal, and on top of that, it gets the extra 100 that Eukrasian Prognosis has by default when you cast it. It is strong, however, it is not really something you want to use all the time, but when you do use it, it can be a very powerful tool. Speaking of incredibly powerful tools, let's get to the last three skills. Haima, Panhaima, and Holos. Let's talk about Haima and Panhaima together because they are essentially the same skill. One is single target and one is AoE. Haima is a button that you press that gives 5 stacks of a buff called Heimatinion? Heimatinon? I'm sorry if I'm butchering this. Which is essentially a buff that will re-grant you a shield if a shield is broken. So you put this on a tank, they get hit, the little shield that Haima gives them is broken. A new shield is formed on top of them if they still have any of the 5 stacks of Heimatinon on them. And each shield is 300 potency, amounting to 1500 potency of shields. Which is really, really, really good. And when the barrier is completely absorbed, the stack is absorbed, and a new barrier is applied. And when the duration expires, there is a heal that goes out, which is 150 potency per remaining stack. It's really useful in ad pulls. It's really useful for a tank that's eating autos and is just kind of weak. It's just a very powerful skill. Panhaima is Haima, but in AoE for the party. It is very useful if you're going to get hit even as few as 2 times in quick succession, because it will reapply the shield after each hit. It is slightly lower potency of only 200, but is still very, very, very powerful. I'd say behind Karakale, Panhaima is the premier AoE mitigation button that Sage brings to the party right now. It is very, very good. Let's talk about the final non-GCD, non-addersgall healing skill. Oh boy. Holos. Holos is an AoE cure of 300 potency, so not terrible, but not the highest thing. But the biggest thing is it is a 20-second mitigation of 10%. 10% mitigation for 20 seconds upon pushing this button. It is very nice. It is a good just mitigation button. And you're realizing now, you have 3 forms of mit on Sage. You have Holos, you have Karakale, and you have Terrakale. Sage has a lot of mitigation in their kit. They are very powerful in Savage fights and in Prog in general. Highly recommend trying it out if you're looking for a healer to play in that type of content. Ooh boy, are you feeling it yet? This video is long. As you can tell, Sage has a lot to its kit, and I'm trying my best to make sure I'm not forgetting anything and putting everything in the video as much as I can. It's time for the final portion of the kit that I have yet to talk about, and that is Zoe and Krasis. So let's talk about Zoe first, because I believe it is the stronger skill, and the skill that you will be using much more often, and I will talk about what skill you will typically pair it with, because it is paired with this 99% of the time. So Zoe is a button that you push, and the next healing spell is buffed by 50%. Now, that is an important clarification, because healing spells are things that are on the GCD, which means there's only 3 buttons, right? There's Prognosis, okay, 50% buff to an AoE heal, not bad. There's Diagnosis, not so great. Then there's Pneuma. Pneuma's already a 600 potency cure that is DPS neutral because it's also doing damage. You can buff that by 50%, making it a 900 potency cure. It can become one of the strongest AoE heals in your kit. Now, Zoe's on a 90-second cooldown. Pneuma's on a 120-second cooldown. However, it's still an amazing combo. There are tons of points in Savage fights and Extreme fights where you're just going to take a big old chunk of damage, and you can plan around that. You can plan for, okay, well, I know this big hit is going out at 2.5 minutes into the fight, and I know the next big hit isn't until 6 minutes into the fight, so I can definitely plan my Zoe Pneumas around those 2 hits. Keep in mind, this is a bit more of the high-end optimization of the job of Sage. If your party just ate a lot of damage from something because people did a mechanic wrong, you can always just Zoe Pneuma immediately to top off the party, because a 900 potency heal is nothing to sneeze at. It is incredibly, incredibly strong. It will essentially top up the party from anything that's not like 1% health. A Zoe Pneuma will top up the party, essentially. It is very, very strong. Now there is Krasis. Krasis is essentially a single target version of Zoe. Not much shorter cooldown, but a shorter cooldown of only 60 seconds. It is single target. It will increase HP recovery via healing actions, which is everything, not just GCDs. It is all of your healing. It is a 20% buff to those for 10 seconds. It can be very useful if a tank is eating a bunch of autos, or a tank needs healing after a buster and you want to use as few skills as possible. Big tank swap, the tank's really low afterwards. You weave in a Krasis 1 GCD, you weave in a Druid Troll in the next GCD, and the tank's essentially full HP. It's a powerful button, but it does kind of fall short compared to the power that is Zoe Pneuma. It's still a good button though, do not forget you have it if someone just really needs a spot heal. Alright, this is going to be super short. This is the opener for Sage. It is incredibly straightforward. Pre-pull, at 3 seconds before you're going to hit the boss, you will use your potion. 1.5 seconds before you're supposed to hit the boss, you will begin to cast Dosis. Then you will immediately use Eukrasia, and then use Eukrasian Diagnosis, so that you apply your damage over time. Then you will hit Diagnosis twice. At that point, all party buffs should be up on the boss, and then you will hit your Phlegma twice, to make sure the Phlegma falls under all party buffs. Then you will continue to hit doses until your Eukrasian Diagnosis wears off, and then you will reapply it. Sage's opener is very straightforward and basic, as is most healers. They don't even have any party buffs to worry about. The big thing is that you have to be waiting until your 4th GCD, maybe even a little later depending on party comp, but typically not any later than 4th GCD, and that is when you will hit your 2 Phlegmas back to back, so that your Phlegmas will fall under all party buffs and do as much damage as possible. After that, Phlegma can be kind of used off cooldown. If there's mechanics that require adds or constructs to die, use Phlegma on those. P3 Savage has several points in time where using Phlegma on adds or on constructs is very powerful. But outside of that, you try and save one for 2-minute buff windows because they come back every 45 seconds, but don't ever let them overcap. The rest of the time is just keep your dot up on the boss. It's a healer. Unfortunately, healer rotations are not very complex at the moment. Alright, this is like a little bonus tidbit. This is very much fight dependent. However, if there's a really large AoE that goes off within the first 20 seconds or so of a fight, you can spend your countdown, assuming it's an extreme or savage fight, you can spend your countdown mass applying eukrasia diagnosis to the party. You only need to apply it to 3 people, but if you do that, when those shields break, you will gain... if I can find it, Addersting. Because that is the thing that is given to you whenever your eukrasia diagnosis shields break. At minimum, before a fight, you should probably just apply eukrasia diagnosis to both tanks, so that if there's anything that targets the tanks early on, auto attacks if nothing else, you will get at least 1 stack of Toxicon. It's free. Why not? Alright, sorry to disappoint, but there's going to be no gameplay in this one. This is just the end of the video. Hopefully this was useful. I spent a lot of time trying to work out all of that I needed to talk about for this video, all that I needed to cover, and I tried to be as accurate as possible. Any questions, comments, concerns, anything that you should think I got wrong, leave a comment. If you liked the video, like it. If you disliked it, dislike it. Either way, hit that sub button if you want to see more. Thanks for watching, thanks for hanging out, and I hope to catch you in the next one.